This video podcast is very sensitive, so perhaps if you have very young children with you, this might be a good time to let them play on their device, watch a cartoon, because we want to talk about infanticide, a brutal, difficult topic, but it's the evolution of the disrespect for life. I'm joined today by two wonderful friends and guests from the Harrisburg area. One is my wonderful friend, Bonnie Finnerty. Bonnie is the Director of Education for the Pennsylvania State Pro-Life Federation. And another friend of mine, familiar to you from some other work we've done together, is Maria Gallagher. And Maria is the director of the Pennsylvania State Federation's Political Action Committee. And so the three of us are here today just to give voice to the voiceless and to honor life. We'll always ask God's blessing on our work, knowing that the voice of John, which is the name of our program, is truly a reflection of the Holy Spirit, the direction, the voice of God Himself speaking to us. So welcome, Maria and Bonnie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Marianne.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Many of us in pro-life circles were aware of a story that was reported last month in the news. Unfortunately, mainstream media didn't pick up on this story, but some babies were discovered last month in the Washington, D.C. area, bodies of aborted babies. And among those bodies were 5 late-term abortions. Now, there's been calls for investigations regarding these babies and whether they were viable, whether there were illegal procedures, whether these babies were cases of infanticide. And I know, Marianne, you have your own story to tell going back many years, but it's such a powerful one. And I'm wondering, in light of this recent development, if you would just share the story that you encountered as a young nurse.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And yes, I am always grateful to be the voice of John. And you know, my husband said to me once, "You have been blessed with the curse." And I thought that was just such a beautiful and profound way to reflect on that period of time. I am the voice of John. And it's so hard to even go back there this many years later, but I was working, after having worked for a year in oncology, I noticed in the hospital where I was working that there was a position for an obstetrical nurse. And I thought, as honored as I always felt to be with somebody as they took their last final breath on this earth, it was just so wonderful to think of being with a person taking their very first breath on this earth. And so I put my application in and I was hired for the position of obstetrics, never thinking that I should ask, "Do you kill children in your obstetrical department?" And it was my very, very first night on the unit. And I can still remember I was carrying my little clipboard along with me. I wanted to do everything right. I checked the labor rooms, the delivery rooms. There was an operating room for what I thought was for cesarean sections. But the last room to be checked was the dirty utility room. And when I walked into the dirty utility room, there on the counter, cold and naked, was a child. As soon as I walked in, I thought I heard a sound. I quick turned on the light. I thought it was like maybe a mouse. That was what came in my head. But it was a little and I quickly went out. I said to the doctors and nurses, "There's a baby on the dirty utility room counter." And the doctor, in a very firm voice, said, "Don't touch it. It's an abortion. I thought maybe it was a miscarriage and that I imagined, I heard. So I went back in, and there, naked and cold, was a little boy, and he was squirming to get back into this fetal position for his warmth. And I went back out, and I said, he's alive, he's moving, he's making sounds. And again, with a firmer voice, don't touch it. It's an abortion. And as I went back to him, I was thinking, is this what Roe versus Wade did? Is this what it was about? This is not a blob of tissue. This is not a POC. This is a little boy. Now, I'm Roman Catholic, so I did the only thing I could think of. I saw that there was a soiled blanket there, and I wrapped him in the blanket. And then I took the very water that was just used in the killing procedure, and I poured it over his head, and I said, I baptize you, John, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I would remain with John through the night. He actually lived for several hours, so obviously he was breathing, he was viable, he was alive, he was John. And I remained with him, and I learned the lessons of his life. But, you know, it's always been talked about that John was a victim of abortion. And indeed, he was. He was the victim of what was a prostaglandin abortion. But John was also, and has been, he is the voice of infanticide. And infanticide is, you know, if that word just disgusts me. We hear of germicides and an infant, insecticide. It's a baby, killing the babies. And so he is the voice of infanticide, and he has been. And it has reared its ugly head again in the state of Pennsylvania. First with the Gottsnell incidents, you know, we saw infanticide. He's in jail. He's serving time for his crimes against humanity, against infants and against women. It's rearing its ugly head in the state of Pittsburgh, at the University of Pittsburgh, with the things that are being disclosed and the investigations. But most recently, yes, in Washington, D.C., and I have some notes about it, but there was a group, they're called the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, PAAU, and they were involved in a discovery in late March, and two very, very brave women, Teresa Buchanan and Lauren Handy, and I think it's important to note that Teresa, she confirms herself very much leftist. She is an atheist. So this is not a Catholic issue, a Christian issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's crimes against humanity. But the two girls, Lauren and Teresa, they went to an abortion clinic out in Maryland, in D.C., I'm sorry. And as they were there, as they arrived, the Curtis Bay Medical Waste Services, they were parked outside, and 2 boxes with biohazardous waste were being brought into the truck. And these 2 girls approach the driver of the Curtis Bay waste management truck and asked if they could have the boxes. Now, naturally, he's a little confused, like, what would you do with that? And they said, do you know what's in the boxes? Medical waste? And they said, no, probably the bodies of aborted babies, and we would give them a funeral. So the driver supposedly handed the boxes to the girls, and they took these boxes to their apartment. And while they were videoing, they opened the boxes. In those boxes were the bodies of 110 aborted children. And these babies, and I am so proud of these two women because they opened the box. Imagine this. And inside, along with the other babies, there were 5 late-term abortions, appearing to be late-term abortions. And these women courageously gave those babies faces and names. They photographed what was happening. So let me tell you, the first little boy was Christopher. Christopher X is his name. I love that they gave them a name just as I named John. Christopher X was intact. Doctors looking at the footage, the videos that they had, or the pictures that they had, said this little boy belongs in a nursery, not in a garbage can. He appears very viable. So the question there, was Christopher born alive and left to die? The girls described it as the most devastating, soul-crushing moment of their life. And I can tell you something. I understand. I do. I know what it is. That devastating, soul-crushing moment that I met John. But then they proceeded, and the next little baby, her name is Harriet. She was a little girl. Her one eye was wide open, and in the back of her head, in the back of Harriet's head, you see the stab wound, what appears to be a stab wound. You see the wound. There looks like a little compression of the skull. I would say that that looks to me to be a partial birth abortion. So both Harriet and Christopher X, that would be federal crimes. A born alive baby left to die, or a partial birth abortion. The next 2 children, Angel and Holly, they were victims of dismemberment abortion. Brutal, violent death of abortion. It's horrible. Arms, limbs, skin is ripped. It's a horrible way to die. And then the last little baby, the name is Phoenix. And Phoenix was born in the amniotic sac. He was still in the sac. So these brave women, they gave name, they gave vision to infanticide, just as John did. And I understand that soul-crushing moment. I understand. God bless them. God bless their bravery. God bless their actions. And you know, I want to show you a picture I have here. This wonderfully courageous Catholic priest gave the babies a funeral. There's the burial place. He has refused to disclose the burial place, obviously, but he says the Sacred Heart of our Blessed Mother looks upon their grave.
Marianne, I join you in applauding these young women for their courage. They're really trying to bring to light a subject that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to believe that this happens, or they want to turn away. You know, what happened to you had such a huge impact on your life. I mean, it happened, over 40 years ago, right? And here we are today. It gave a lot of direction to your life in terms of how you're going to live your life and the message that you would put out there. So tell us about the Voice of John. You have both a documentary and a radio show. How are you trying to, like these young ladies, raise awareness And what kind of impact are you making, and remembering John's legacy?
I have 4 children, but I always say John is the child of my soul. He's a part of my heart, just as my 4 kids were. And, I would spend the year after John was born, aborted, died by infanticide, I would spend the next year of my life often in prayer, but perhaps I would have to admit to angry prayer, like, God, why did you let me see him? Why did you let me find that little boy? Why did you let me love him like I do? Why would I wake up and I would feel his little finger holding my hand? Why did I hear that sound that I heard? And it was about a year later, and I said that same prayer, but perhaps with an open heart. God, why did you let me find John? Why did you let me love him? And that's when I met my destiny. I would be the voice of John. And that was the last words I spoke to John. John, I promise you I will be your voice. And in that moment when I surrendered that cross to God, my destiny, our destiny, John's and mine, to move forward, to be his voice, to let him speak, to tell the horrors of that day, of that night. That's when it happened. And I started, I went to a little church in Hazleton where they had a pro-life group, and I told the story of John. And from there, I joined Pennsylvanians for Human Life in the Hazleton area, and I started telling the story to church groups and civic organizations. The Knights of Columbus listened to me. And John's voice was growing, but it was also evolving. It was abortion. It was infanticide. It became so closely linked with Down syndrome. And I want to share, one time I spoke at a church in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And I always talk about Down syndrome, very precious to my heart. But after the Mass, the altar server came up to me and he said, "Thank you for standing up for my side." And, naturally I said, "You're welcome." But I went home and it just bothered me. I kept thinking, why would I have to stand up for him? He is good. He's a part of my world. He's a part of my life. I see him at church. He's like a light on the altar. When he carries that cross down the aisle, he just touches my soul. So I went back the next week and I said, I've been thinking about you thanking me for standing up for your side, and I'm honored to stand up for you, and I always will. I said, "What is your name?" He said, "My name is John." I got the message from the Holy Spirit that day for sure. And John became a very integral part of the Voice of John and Pennsylvanians for Human Life. If you visit my website, because along with doing a documentary on the Voice of John and all the lessons I learned that day, but I also do some TV programs called A Matter of Life, and you can see those on the Voice of John website. But John Frank was on my website, and amongst other things, he talked about the challenges. It was very brave and very honest, the challenges and the blessings of Down syndrome. And he talked about his rare ability to love. And most importantly, I remember the last question was, what would you say to a woman who is being told she is carrying a Down syndrome child? And John addressed that in a way I could not, for he has Down syndrome. And another thing I want to share is this beautiful picture. I'm going to put that right in front of me. And this picture, anybody who knows me knows I love the moon. And so that picture was done for me by another very important member of my organization, Catherine Riley. And Catherine has Down syndrome, but she's an educator for our chapter as well. John is the official spokesperson for the Northeast region. Catherine is an educator. Again, video podcasting and radio show with Catherine, speaking of Down syndrome, the challenges, the joys of her life, painting and dancing. She's just an amazing lady. So Down syndrome people, we have one country that brags that they've eradicated Down syndrome. I was like, that's very interesting. How would you change a genetic structure? You don't, you kill them. You kill them through abortion. And we need to stand for our Down syndrome children, for anybody with any disability. You know, they do these prenatal testings, but the FDA is saying that this is not always accurate. How many children that have no diagnosis have been aborted? And how many children with Down syndrome, how many gifts that we've been given in our Down syndrome population, that we should kill them and feel we have a right.
What are your impressions of legislation such as the Maryland measure, which seeks to expand abortion?
It sickens me. But you know, we have to think about it. The Maryland legislation, to our viewers, Maryland legislation would expand abortion. We have abortion through 9 months, but beyond. It would legalize, sanction infanticide in a very, very horrible way. But, you know, they talk about the perinatal period. So let's really, you know, dissect that just a little bit. This would be such a crime against humanity. But when we think of it, what is the difference between that late-term abortion, that baby in the womb, and 6 inches, 20 minutes? It's just a matter of location. He's out there. So if we can disrespect life, as Mother Teresa, St. Mother Teresa said, if you disrespect life at any stage, you will disrespect life at every stage. How true. That Maryland piece, which would sanction infanticide for 28 days. So that's the child who has Down syndrome. And the mother says, no place in my world for a Down syndrome child. It would be a child who has trisomy 18. And I think my niece, Elizabeth Leon, in her book, Let Yourself Be Loved, in the video podcasting and radio programs that she did with me, speaks beautifully to the love, the day that her little boy was born with trisomy 18, and the blessing of holding her baby and loving him for the 26 hours that she was given. So the Maryland piece is absolutely disgusting, but you know what? This might be for all of us the aha moment. This kind of legislation, and the fact that while that is being introduced, we're looking at right next door in DC, children, 5 of them, late-term abortions, who, you know, and that's one of the things I want to say. We want an autopsy on these 5. Do you know, I think they're still with the coroner out there? Yes. I
think so.
They are still refusing to autopsy the victims to prove that the federal crimes were committed. But I think that all this overlap, you know, the investigation into Pittsburgh, the DC 5, while this legislation, this very legislation is being proposed, that we would have an additional 28 days to discard a human life. God is clearly giving us a message. Stand up, be proactive, defend life from the moment of conception to its natural death.
Mary Ann, do you think that Roe versus Wade will be overturned?
I do. I feel that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. Prayerfully, hopefully, we have a Supreme Court which will take us in that direction. But are we prepared, state by state, to stand up, to defend life? And, you know, when we talk about the actual evolution of, you know, first trimester abortion, there are states that are the heartbeat bill or pain capable. We've looked at components of legislation. We, in our state of Pennsylvania, although I hope this video podcast will be shown, but every state, look at what your state, who you voted for, who you're electing. While we don't tell you how to vote, who to vote for, we do tell you how to vote. You must vote pro-life. You must vote for defenders of life, so that, yes, when Roe versus Wade is overturned and comes back to each individual state, my hope is that my state, Pennsylvania, will be a sanctuary state for the unborn and newly born
Mary Ann, you've been quite busy going out to schools and parishes and the community to be the voice of John. So can you talk a little bit about what your main message is when you go out, and how is it received?
Well, that's a great question, because yes, I go out to schools, even from K through high schools. I've been to colleges. I'm not usually invited, but I would like to be. But yes, I go out. I speak to parish organizations, our Assembly of God, our Baptist Church, Catholic churches. I speak to the voice of John. And importantly, even in the radio program, we talk about end-of-life issues. We've had hospice on with us, palliative care. Dr. Frank Schell and I have, and Joe McCullough, we have discussed those end-of-life issues. But the pro-life message, by and large, is so well received. So many people will say, when do you start to teach the pro-life message? And quite frankly, we're doing a little series now on teaching elementary school children the building blocks, the words like respect, bullying, being bullied, and how important it is to stand up for somebody who's alone, kindness. Those are the building block words that we teach in our elementary schools. This week I read a storybook called The Dot, and it's a beautiful way for parents or grandparents to talk to their children, and schools. And The Dot will actually be being shown in a couple schools throughout Northeast PA. So I'm so grateful for people that realize that the pro-life message must start very, very early, because our children in schools are receiving a rather perverse education about their bodies or their sexuality. And we as pro-lifers, it's our obligation to get in there and start early with a very strong pro-life message. You know, we've got to set the bar, give them the challenge. And that's not to say, you know, particularly as kids go into junior high or high school, that's not to say that they're not going to make mistakes. We did. We all did. A lot of us did. But it's to say there's a standard, and we want you to feel in charge and not bullied, not harassed, or not abnormal. If chastity if chastity is your goal, it's a beautiful goal and it's attainable. And so we want to empower women. And you know, so many people will say that to be pro-life, you know, it's so misogynistic and it's men. Oh, you know, get over that thinking. Pro-life is pro-woman. To be post-abortive, and that's one of the things, one of the areas where the voice of John has really, really moved into very strongly. I'm honored, I'm touched when I give a presentation and afterwards somebody comes up to me and says, I had an abortion, I had 2 abortions, I had 3. I've worked so closely with post-abortive women. Do you honestly think that you've empowered a woman when you tell her you can kill her young? I don't think so. And to be pro-life is really to be the ultimate feminist and say, you're strong, you can do this, but we will help you. We don't leave you alone. We'll stand by you. We'll offer you not only to get you through your pregnancy, but the resources, the avenues that you can go through after you've given birth. Like I said, it's end-of-life issues, it's Down syndrome, it's trisomy 18, it's speaking to post-abortive women, it's speaking to young girls, very important, it's speaking to post-abortive men, and we also have radio programs where we interviewed post-abortive men and the wound that they live with. So it's as expansive as the imagination of the Holy Spirit. So you can imagine the roads I've traveled as the voice of John.
You know, he lives such a short time, yet his life is having such a great impact. And we're so blessed that you are out there bringing these beautiful messages to communities all throughout Pennsylvania and through the world, really, through your documentary and through your radio program and through your website. So in closing, can you just remind us where people can find the Voice of John?
Yes, you can visit the Voice of John. I'm going to show you. This is the documentary. It's a beautiful documentary. You can get it on the Voice of John website, and I always go to you must put the in, the Voice of John 2.org. There you will have access to over 100 radio programs that I've produced, video podcasts with Students for Life, post-abortive women, Down syndrome, Catherine Riley. There's some great video podcasting. This program will be part of that. But visit it and learn the lessons of the Voice of John.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for your
Maria,
wonderful witness and your testimony and your continued support for babies and their mothers and their fathers. Thank you so very much.
Thank you both so much for being part of the Voice of John, being a part of my life, because, you know, these 2 women have done such great work out of Harrisburg. Maria has been, both of you, I guess, on my video podcasting, and always received with such respect for the message, the empowering message that they deliver. So God bless you both. Thank you so much for joining me and John, the Voice of John.